This is the light which shall give revelation to the Gentiles, the mystery of God in the world, for the salvation of the world.
Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Jordan Pacheco from the Glad Trad podcast. I hope you're doing well, and I am sitting with such an exciting guest today. This is the lovely Jodi Lacroix. She is a resident here in Colorado with me. She's also one of my fellow parishioners at Mount Carmel, and two of the coolest things is that she's actually one of the founding members of Mount Carmel. And for those who know, Mount Carmel, I think it still is the second largest fraternity parish in the country. And she also is one of the artists behind the absolutely fantastic restoration of our sanctuary. And so there is so much stuff to unpack with your story. Jodi, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Before we begin, get into the nuts and bolts of what it's like to restore a church sanctuary. I want to know a little bit more about you because I know that your history and finding tradition and everything is quite interesting, and it's really an honor for guys like me to be able to talk to people who I think were in the midst of the fights for a lot longer, than I've been. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing. Were you a cradle Catholic? What was your mass experience like before tradition, and what were those early days of Carmel?
Okay, I'd love to. And first of all, I have to talk about my late husband, John, because the story actually starts there. John was an altar boy in Quebec in the late 50s and early 60s for the Latin Mass. Fell in love with it. When Vatican II came along, he left the church. He walked away from his faith. He didn't like the changes. And so fast forward, we met, and he decided that he wanted to marry me in the Catholic Church. I was a Protestant. Oh, wow. Okay. And so he did the work necessary to make that happen. And the day that we got married was the first day that he received communion again and came back into the church.
How long had he been gone for?
A good couple of decades.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So he was super, super joyful. And it was the English Mass de Novus Ordo. He loved the Latin Mass. He just talked about it all the time. So I didn't convert right then, but and he was okay with that. But a couple of years later, I was at a meeting somewhere and somebody talked about Our Lady of Fatima. And I got angry because growing up Protestant, you're just kind of told that Our Lady is just, she gave birth to Jesus. That's okay. And so when I heard the Miracle of the Sun story, where she appeared to 75,000 people, and I was just amazed at it. And the next thing I knew, Our Lady was everywhere. She was on billboards. She was on magazines. I couldn't get away from her. And she literally just came into my life. And at the time, an old Irish priest named Father John McGinn called me up to him and he said, "You come to Mass, but you're not Catholic, or you're not receiving communion." And I said, "Well, I'm not Catholic." He said, "Be in my office Monday morning." So he gave me a big, thick catechism of Father John Hardin, and Our Lady wouldn't stop until I became a Catholic, which I did in 1988. So, as you know, converts are dangerous because we're zealous. So,
I've always said it's a joke, of course, but I'm a bit envious with converts because for cradles like me, we kind of just more or less handed, these things. You kind of just go into them or you don't. But for converts, you guys really have to fight in order to enter the faith, and that's such a beautiful witness for everybody.
Oh, thank you. It was just such a joy. And actually reverts like John were dangerous too, because he was all excited to be a Catholic again. So, we started teaching sacraments at the CCD classes. We were doing all this stuff. And then our wonderful Orthodox priest, Father Leo Bloch in Lafayette retired the very week that Father Jose Salgado of the fraternity arrived in Denver to say the Latin Mass. It was just crazy.
So what year is that about?
1996.
Oh, wow. July. Okay. Oh, wow.
And it was on the feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is why our parish is named Our Lady of Mount Carmel. So we got invited to the first Mass, and it was in the basement of Tom and Ann Langevin. We were sitting on bar stools, literally. And Archbishop Stafford, at the time he became a cardinal later, but he invited the fraternity here. But when Father Salgado got here, he hadn't really made plans for him. So we contacted all the different churches and everything, and we ended up getting invited into the chapel of a small Catholic school, actually, that our kids were going to. And there we were, the start of it. There were 16 people at the first Mass. And then we got out our address books and started calling everybody we knew that, loved tradition, and it started to build.
Wow. There's so much to unpack. Let me do it in chronological order. When you said that you were a Protestant, what kind of Protestant were you?
My family would go to Presbyterian or Methodist churches, depending on what was closest, to be honest with you. And we weren't, very fervent in going. And I just remember once I hit high school and college, there just wasn't anything there that held me to it. And so I walked away from it too. I love God, but I just couldn't connect with that. So yeah, that's kind of my background.
And then what was the catalyst for your husband? Because we've talked to and certainly had the experiences of a lot of Catholics who were so scandalized by a lot of the changes that they walked away from the faith. So it's such a remarkable thing that your husband, really, it almost seems like spurred by his marriage to you, comes back to the sacrament. So what was the thing that kind of did it? Because that's just such a beautiful story, but that's such a, that very much happened for millions of people.
Yes, he definitely wanted to marry me in the Catholic Church. And I just think that even though he didn't have the Latin Mass, I think he held out hope. I do. I think and also he just did his best, and he was a voracious reader. So he just studied the faith and just kept going with it. And I just think that he just pined for that Latin Mass. That's all I heard. And they did have a indult Mass going on at the time in Denver. It was once a month at a late time on a Sunday. We'd sneak off to that a lot, and stuff. So he just kept his toe in the water and just kept reaching towards it.
My hat really goes off to you OGs, because we're in a world now. It's just over a year from Traditionis Custodes, and we've been very fortunate here. A lot of friends across the world have not been so fortunate, and so it's kind of nice in a way, to hear that there were people who were in a drought a lot longer than we were, and some of us are still very fortunate. So that's amazing. So let's fast forward. So it's 1996, and the fraternity has just been established by the graces of Archbishop Stafford here in Denver. Now, I love how you say that you got out your address books and started calling people. One thing about the Latin Mass that I think is organic is, and especially for me as a cradle, I know this, right? It's very funny how my entire life, I've heard things like springtime of new evangelization and all this stuff, right? And I think it's funny because that means a million things to a million different kinds of people. But I never grew up with a sense of evangelistic zeal. I don't think that was very much implanted in me. But organically going to the Latin Mass, now I won't shut up about it, so much so that it's been a spur for Rudy and I to make this podcast, right? So I think it's very interesting that there's something about the Latin Mass that organically, without really a call from the pulpit or something, makes you want to pick up your phone, go to your address book and be like, hey, you guys got to check this out.
Yes, absolutely. The people that we got a hold of, the Mass that we had up in Lafayette, Father Block was just so reverent, and it was a beautiful Mass, and people would come from all over just to travel. We were Roman Catholics. Like, we were always going to
there we go.
It would work for us, right? And so I called all those people because I knew they were already willing to travel and they love tradition, I could tell. And but I got to confess that when we first started going to the Mass, I was lost. I looked at the book and my eyes got big, and and he's like, just keep going. But then he said, you love to sing, and there's the choir, and so that did it. I joined the choir, particularly Christmastide and Holy Week.
Wow.
It was just amazing, those beautiful songs that were sung at those times in Latin. And then the choir director made sure that we learned Gregorian chant really quick. They had some workshops and stuff. But I realized, oh my gosh, that's the easiest thing to sing in the world if you understand it. And it's genius and it's ancient. And so I fell in. I just I just fell in love with
that's so beautiful. I
Latin.
love what you say there about Gregorian chant. That's one of my greatest observations I've ever made. And part of the great controversy with the change is obviously one of the things that I don't think is talked about nearly enough is for the practical Catholic, his boots on the ground, right, who doesn't spend his time reading church documents and the theology behind the mass, these sorts of things. The things that were stripped away, of course, were the visuals and the auditory. And so it's amazing to me that Gregorian chant, which is extraordinarily easy and organic for an entire congregation to sing. It's kind of amazing how it's like, we can have this beautiful complexity and polyphony and stuff, but at the heart, it's very interesting how like everyone knows how to sing a Kyrie and a Sanctus. And you just learn it. It's not difficult. When you actually, what's cool about the notation of Gregorian chant is, I classically am trained as a musician, so I know how to read our modern musical notation. But with Gregorian chant, of course, it's like you're just looking at the notation and the dots, and all the lines and curves, and it just makes sense. It's amazing. It's just amazing how it makes sense. And so I feel like, for me, especially coming to tradition, one of the things that really drew me is that the first time I ever heard sacred music was pretty much my secular public high school or middle school choir, right? But I always knew that it existed and I always loved it. And it's kind of nice to casually sit in mass and to be hearing music that really is the music of the soul, really is the music of heaven. And it's not put on by humanism or anything like that. You're not singing for the sake of your tambourine or something.
No banjos.
Oh, we never had a banjo, Matt.
Well,
yeah, but I know they exist. Yes. So here you go. Okay, so it's the late 90s now. When the choir started and everything, how many people at this point were going, and were you guys still in this little the school's chapel or whatever it was?
Oh yeah, the chapel probably seated 60 people. So, and then they had like a back room to it. They opened up, so the choir jammed into there, and that was like 20, 25 of us. Yep. And it just kept growing and growing. And in the meantime, we were trying to acquire anything that would go with the mass, vestments, all the stuff on the altar and everything. So Father Salgado went up to Quebec, Canada, because they were unfortunately closing a ton of churches up there. And he was able to just acquire a couple of semi-truckloads of stuff, actually brought it. They shipped it down here. We got a pulpit, we got a communion rail, we got vestments. And I remember unpacking bags with the ladies, and they had just shoved vestments and they didn't really know what they were. And at the bottom of it was a towel, and it had like this cloth with something sewed into the middle of it. And John was there and he said, "What is that?" And he goes, "Oh, it's a Greek corporal. There's a relic in there." Oh. And that's for priests when they want to offer mass at different altars and stuff. So, it was just mind-blowing, the stuff that we were finding. In the meantime, we're growing, and Christmas and Holy Week, we had to rent churches because, we couldn't fit we started out with one mass, we quickly went to 2 and then 3. And so we were, I like to say, a sacristy in a van.
Yeah, you go.
Packed in there, and you get there like 3 hours early, unload everything. We even had an nativity scene that we put on a piano at one of those churches. And then, of course, after the mass, you'd have to pack it all up. And so it was just a lot of work, and it was unbelievably joyful because we were such a small little minority. I'm sure people thought we were totally weird, and we didn't care because we were getting to, we had what we had. And so, we did a lot of that. And then eventually, I think it was in the early, it was even in the late 90s, Archbishop Chaput allowed us to go to Good Shepherd Church for our high mass because we were just overgrown. Yeah. And so we had our mass at the very end of their mass. And just kind of a funny story, they had a table altar. It had actually been used, St. Pope John Paul II had offered Mass at World Youth Day in 93 on it. So they were very worried about it. And we needed to move it for our Mass. So we had a bunch of engineers, and you know how engineers are. And so one of them got a hospital gurney, and brought it in, lifted it up, got it out in the hallway, and they had to let us do it. So
Oh, God bless you guys. Oh my gosh.
we moved the altar out, and we would have our mass and then put it back.
Oh
and,
my gosh.
You
That's
know,
that, I love these little stories. And part of one of the reasons I like having this podcast is it's not just so I can, talk to myself for half an hour or an hour or something, but also so I can hear the stories again, like that just entire scenarios that I can't even envision. And I read about them and I talk to people about it, but it's funny because, I know where Good Shepherd is now. I know where Carmel is now. You would never guess, that I've always said that there's something called the Latin ghetto. So when I was in California and I was there for 5 years, the fraternity has right now a very small church called St. Vitus. Very, very small. It's out in the middle of San Fernando. It's a very working class part of the city. It's a Latin ghetto because it's away from all the real, even beautiful architecture churches of LA, right? But it's so joyous, and there's so many people going that they actually can't fit mass in the church. So since COVID, they've had mass outside in this tent. They call it the tent cathedral or something. Father Friar, forgive me if I can't quite remember. But it's funny because I remember how many times I've gone up to mass there, and I just keep saying, man, this is the most beautiful moment happening in all of LA right now. Like, you just don't care,
right there in a tent.
Yeah, in a tent, like
It's awesome.
And it's ironic because I know that there were plenty of priests post the council who would have been overjoyed with the idea of to have mass in a tent, and yet it's all the trads that are forced in all these kind of weird places, hotel rooms and tents and outdoors.
It's so funny. It's ironic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, that's so great.
That's beautiful. So for you, here we've gone from, this budding little appreciation for Latin Mass, this growing the beauty of the choir, to actually preserving relics and vestments and these sorts of things. And I'm absolutely in great awe, because it seems like such just a very organic development that I think the laity have really done a lot of groundwork on, right? Just casually rummaging through stuff, trying to preserve things as best to help these priests. And so you probably have come across a ton of stuff that they just chucked away in other places.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, there's been an underground movement going on all this time to preserve stuff, really since the 60s, rescuing statues. And as you saw in the Mass Ages movie, my husband and I did the statue repair. So that happened, and then those beautiful ladies doing the vestments, and a whole bunch of sisters all over the country were learning those skills and arts again. And yeah, people, because we love the Mass so much, so that's precious to us.
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna do it. So and then after Good Shepherd and so forth, and by the way, the Archdiocese of Denver the archbishops have just been so generous to us. We bought a property on Sheridan at 72nd, and we were going to build a church there, and it became impossible. So we ended up selling it to a developer. We made quite a profit on it. And that is how we bought the church in Littleton.
Oh, really? Oh, wow.
And the Archdiocese let us keep that profit and do that. And so in 2001, we bought this property. It was an old Episcopalian church. And a bunch of our workers, I talk about my John and I being founding members, but there were so many people that did so much work. So please don't think we're super special. People worked really hard, and they fixed up the sanctuary area, and we went in there, painted over the red door, the red Episcopalian door.
Yeah, that's right. No more Anglicans.
Our first Mass there was a week after, it was in September, a week after 9/11, a week after. And wow. Archbishop Pugh was there, and it was so amazing because he had to bless the church. Mm-hmm. So they did a huge X in sand on the floor of the church. The pews were out of there. And with his, his staff, he wrote Greek letters backwards. And they helped him because he was challenged there. And it was just an amazing ceremony. And there we were with that church in a rectory. Amazing.
That's so beautiful. I was very I didn't know this history with Archbishop Chaput, but because of my work, I had the ability to film him last year. So and his reputation has far outgrown the man because he's such a wonderful guy. So
Oh,
that's just so beautiful. Who is it?
yeah.
Was it still the original priest from the fraternity that was out there at the time?
Yes, in 2001, Father Salgado was still here, and that was fantastic. And then we had a series of assistants that came through. So I have been able to meet so many wonderful priests and seminarians. And then the seminarians, well, let me think, the seminary in Lincoln wasn't built yet. But since it has, they've been coming to visit us. But
Yeah.
some of them would come to help, and it was just golden. It was great. We kept growing and growing, and especially now that we had this church. And so I'm trying to think. About 2006, then we had a shift in priests, and Father Jackson ended up coming, and we had already met him. My husband and I started going to the seminary as it was being built, like the very cornerstone ceremony. And then when they didn't even have the front doorknob on it yet, and let you in.
Wow,
And
it
was so fun to watch them build that. And every time we went to the seminarians treated us like visiting kings and queens, and just waited on us. And we're just they're wonderful. They're all wonderful. So anyway, the seminary's going up, our church is growing. Let's see, we ended up with 3 priests at once because we were growing. And then let me think, Father Jackson starts to realize that we have to expand the church. It was a very low ceiling church with rock walls and kind of dark, pretty small.
Yeah.
And so the plan started to go through to tear it down and build this gorgeous high ceiling church that we have now. And he based his idea on building the church on the work of, I think, St. Charles Borromeo, How to Build a Cathedral. Everything, Father wrote his wonderful book on symbolism. So everything in our church is symbolic.
That's right.
Because we owe him a lot for that.
I hope you have pictures of these times before I went, because it was a low ceiling, which means we didn't have the high altar at the point as we think of it.
Oh no, even the altar is a story. But you have to forgive me. I have to tell this really quick story.
Please, come on.
While the high ceiling was being built at the church, my husband was on the building committee, so he was able to sneak back there and see the progress and everything. And I'll never forget, he snuck me back there. He told me to close my eyes, and we came through the sacristy, and I hadn't seen in the inside yet. He said, "Okay, open your eyes." And when I saw that tall, beautiful ceiling in the space, it was just, he loved watching me look at that. I was just, it was just so wonderful. Now I'm trying to remember, the altar. So we needed a high altar, and Father Jackson had an amazing ability to find exquisite things. And I think it was the company King Richard in Atlanta. They advertised this altar. It was in a church in Buffalo, and it was about to be destroyed.
Wow.
And it was a $2.6 million, I think, altar with the side altars. And so we bought it for under $100,000.
Oh, there we go. They were just gonna destroy it. Was it because the church in Buffalo was closed, or they just have any need for it? Of course. They were
gonna close, and it was gonna be destroyed. So, and we paid a good price. They had to ship it, and then there was a crew of about 12 men that we had all the pieces of the altar on the sides of the parish hall for like months, and they would just come and build it from the ground up. And the foundation couldn't handle the weight of that main altar, so they had to bury cement pillars in the ground to make sure that it would, be okay. And then the other thing that happened was the 2 side altars. When we built our new church, the city took away about 8 feet of room because of variances and stuff. So we almost couldn't fit the side altars, but at the last minute they figured out a way to get those.
Jeez Louise, God bless them.
I
I love this scrappy ingenuity. I am all about it. You know, we have celebrated Mass in such funny little conditions. Pentecost Sunday 3 years ago now it is. My wife and I were in San Jose for confirmation, and went to the new Mass with some family, and was not a very good experience, shall we say. It was not, and it was like everything was done with COVID over here, but of course it's near San Francisco there, so it was bad. Like, it was really bad. I'm not the kind of guy to get scandalized a lot. I kind of have the Chesterton Cervantes just smile at troubles sort of thing, I think. But so the next day I knew that the Institute of Christ the King, of course, was doing Mass in San Jose. And they were located at they'd gone from being able to be in the Portuguese church out there, which is 5 Runes. They were instead actually celebrating Mass Pentecost Sunday in a little strip mall. So again, Latin ghettos. And my wife and I went that Sunday morning, and I still said, I was like, this is the most beautiful Mass you could possibly imagine. This Mass in this strip mall with these people just trying to worship the Lord as their ancestors have worshipped is so beautiful. And because that's actually the majority of my Latin Mass experience, technically, because before Carmel I was out at St. Vitus, I kind of felt a little nostalgic about just still kind of having that little scrappy trad self in there. So I mean, I'm just in awe of the tenacity of you and your fellows. I mean, honestly, you guys helped lay the groundwork really for trads like me to ease in post Summorum Pontificum a lot easier.
Yes, absolutely. And I take such joy when I sit there at Mass every Sunday and I look at what we have and I remember where we started, and I am thrilled for anyone who's able to come now because of all the things that all of us did. It's an honor.
It's amazing how. So the first time I went to Mount Carmel was probably about 2013, 2014. I just graduated high school, and I had a friend he told me, I'll never forget this. He said, listen, you got to come down to this church called Our Lady Mount Carmel in Littleton, very far away from my Elizabeth, Colorado, I thought. There's this priest there who gives amazing homilies, but check it, the Mass is in Latin. And it's different, and you got to check it out. And I'd known the Latin Mass existed. I had like this historical sense of it, but I'd never gone to one. And I remember, and this is why I love your story about just going to the first Latin Mass and just being like, what? Because even for cradle Catholics, I think even for cradle Catholics, it's almost more so because you feel like you have this ownership of what the Mass is, and then you can't even follow along, And so then when you fall into it a little more, you're like, oh, that's what that is, But I remember in high school, Fulton J. Sheen has a commentary over a, I think it's Easter or Christmas Mass somewhere in like 1940s. It's a really, really beautiful thing. And I remember watching it, and I remember the two things I thought was I was waiting for each pause so the priest would turn around and say something so I know where they're at. And it was a high Mass, this beautiful pontifical high Mass. And I just remember going, one, the choir is just singing all the time, so I have no idea where the priest is. And number two, he keeps facing the book. Like, I remember being like, and I was kind of mad. I was mad because I was so perplexed at like, okay, this is like the Mass that the church has done for all time, but I have no idea how even to approach this.
Yes, I know. It's the craziest feeling. And then when you start to realize that came first, and like what we were used to came after, but there's parts of the newer one that were shortened, that were in the it's just mind-boggling.
Yeah, and what I love is back to the evangelical zeal of it. One thing that very much interests me and interests Rudy is how strange it is that for some strange reason you may not, and you probably don't speak Latin fluently. And so it's like you can't understand every little individual aspect of the Mass unless you flip, but somehow there's deeper comprehension. And and especially since the church is a 2,000-year-old church, and this has been our main liturgy of the Roman Rite for that duration. It's amazing to me how our ancestors, Cristeros, Japanese martyrs, the Crusaders, like all these sorts of people, this was the mass that Christianized the pagan Vikings. This is the mass that somehow spread from Rome, and it's amazing to go, how is it that all these people? It's like none of these people spoke Latin originally, like they just didn't, but they understood deeply the organically the sacrificial nature of what's going on, and how their lives have to be oriented to the mass, and how from that suddenly stems like the desire. I find a greater desire for there to be altar servers, right? For boys who want to serve the mass, and for people to join the choir, and for people just casually to be like, oh, looks like we need a new, set of altar rails. What can we do in order to facilitate that?
Oh yes, I have seen over the years some amazing creations.
Yeah.
That and being in an art restoration too, people are very amazing. There's two things about the Latin too. Latin, of course, has it's the root words for all the Romance languages, and so I realized that I was starting to understand things so much better when I figured out the original Latin. But my husband told me that in Quebec growing up, all the churches were Latin. So that was fine. And then when they changed it to the vernacular, all of a sudden there was a French church and a Spanish church and an English church and an Italian church, and it divided everybody up, because before that you could go all over the world, and sitting next to somebody from China, everybody understood the Mass.
Yeah.
So the Latin Mass is beautifully unifying in that way.
I love that observation, because when I was out in Burbank, the church I went to, the Novus Ordo I went to, for the time, it had an English community, a Spanish community, and a Vietnamese community. And generally speaking, these communities didn't intersect. And what they do a lot of times in kind of big multicultural parishes now is that, at least out there, is that they'll have mass where the songs or some part of it will be in 3 languages. I remember Christmas Eve mass, and I think it was the oh gosh, was it not the Gloria? It was something, but it was like they do it in English and then in Tagalog and then in Spanish, or whatever. And I remember sitting there, my quip, this was right before I fell into tradition, but I remember going, wow, wouldn't it be funny if there was just a language to kind of unify these people? Because it's nice to know your neighbor. It's nice to see your neighbor who may speak a different language. And
I love it.
So it's the irony. I know, it's just like, wow, who'd have thought? Who'd have thought it? Every time that there's a talk about Esperanto or something like that, I just think, well, it seems like we had a fix for this one a little bit ago, guys. Not terribly complicated.
Exactly. Not all that long ago. And it just seems like it's just so inspired, so divine to unite, the entire world. Like St. Peter talking at Pentecost, everybody understood. Beautiful.
Yeah. So I love you mentioned there a little bit of your art restoration, and I think that this is the perfect time to pivot into that. So you've done a lot for the church. You've done a lot for the church. The thing that really put you on my radar, I should say, is I attended Carmel before. I mean, it was still one of the most beautiful places I'd ever seen, but it was still white in the sanctuary,
Yes.
And I was just so in awe. But I remember walking in one day, and this was after being away in California for a little bit. So you have to check me on the dates when you started with the whole renovation of the sanctuary. But I remember walking in, and the 2 things I remember is that there was a lot of scaffolding, and there was color. And it was and like gold leaf. And it was I almost wept. I was so taken aback by how beautiful an already beautiful space could be, like just the accentuation. So tell me, you are one of the many artists who have helped contribute to what is probably one of, if not the most beautiful church in Denver. And I want to know what that process started and how that looked like.
Right. And just really quick, the angel back here was on, there were 2 angels. They were on the sides of the altar before the restoration, and my husband and I restored those. for a while. They came out of an old church in Denver.
Oh, fantastic.
So my friend has been able to obtain them, and they're just beautiful. But anyway, so again, Father Jackson, he always said that Jesus is the King of Kings and he deserves the best. So he just absolutely needs to have something spectacular. And at that point, he had met artist Kevin O'Connor, and I'm going to brag about him a lot. He's a genius. He's a designer of medieval chapels and just extraordinary artist. And so they met and meshed, and they came up with this plan for what you see. And so the sanctuary we had to have some reconstruction to move some things around so that they could do what Kevin wanted to do. And in the meantime, Laura she ended up volunteering with him, and she's also an amazing artist. She's done our Paschal candles. I don't know if you've ever seen them, but they're incredible, and many other beautiful artwork things. And so they started to work together, and Kevin did all of the woodwork that is on the ceiling. He did all of that in the basement. He did all of the plaster work for the columns. Everything that you see there was actually manufactured by him as well. And I don't know if he ever slept for several years, but they put wood scaffolding over the whole high altar and the side altars, and brought in high scaffolds to get up there. And they even had lifts so they could, some of that was super, super dangerous. And I remember praying for them for 2 years, like, please keep them safe. This is so beautiful. And in the meantime, I was doing some other church things. I think my late husband is my art agent up there, because I started to get really big projects. At the Augustine Institute, I restored the crucifix that you see hanging up.
That's right, the one in the atrium.
And then I did the altars at Sacred Heart of Mary. I refurbished those and everything. But anyway, Kevin and Laura, it's stenciling. It was gold leaf, and they actually had sheets of gold, and they would put glue on, and then they would put them on and rub it. And it was amazing to watch all that go on. And then in 2020, so we approached the lockdown. I got COVID, and then I have an orthodontic dental lab that my husband and I ran for many years, and I've kept it going. Got shut down, of course. And so I'm out of work. Everything's not great. And Father Jackson called me and said, would you like to paint in the sanctuary with Kevin and Laura? Yes, I would love to do that.
Yes.
So my main thing was to paint the side chapels, because that freed them up to keep working on the main area of the altar, the main altar. And so they taught me the stenciling procedures that they used. You put different stencils on in different order, and the gold leafing and the touch-up painting and just all the stuff that it required. And so I work mainly in there. And then the lamps that go up at the side of the main altar, I helped them there as well. But they didn't want me up on the big high stuff, which is probably good, because I'm older than them. And we had all kinds of adventures with, things not working, or just difficulties. So I wonder if some evil forces were a little bit unhappy with what was going on there, but it was just glorious to watch the process of that go on, and I'm just really grateful I got to work with them, and it was amazing.
Your work speaks for itself. I totally forgot that you did that. So I have to post video for my audience because I have it, but it is a tremendous crucifix, gorgeous crucifix that hangs in the atrium of where I work, the Augustine Institute, from Germany originally, isn't it? If I remember correctly.
From the 1930s. It's carved wood, painted, and it weighs a ton. I couldn't work on the entire thing at once, because it was in a small room, and it took 10 people to flip it over so I could work on the
Wow.
back of it. And I redid all the paint and the gold leaf and everything. And I didn't see it all put together until they hung it. And as I was working on it, I thought that the amazing artists that carved that are probably all dead by now. So I prayed for them. So it's working.
Well, that's beautiful. I'll say a prayer for them every time I pass it. Wow.
Yeah.
Were you always an artist? Because the work is fantastic. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It's not just, the best of the church inside. I mean, it really is like the work of heaven. It's an imprint of the divine.
Oh yeah. As I was telling the story in the movie, so when I met John, I was leaving for art school in Chicago for 2 years. And so we did a long distance relationship, and he encouraged me to do that, even though it was hard. And so I have a commercial art degree, and then it came out here and there was a recession and we have kids and everything. So I went to work for him. But then not all that long after that, this broken statue shows up, and he puts it together, hundreds of pieces, and I painted, and priest didn't even realize it was not a new statue, and it was his. And the next thing you know, I know we would get busy and we would say, well, we're not going to do any statues anymore. And then the next thing you know, we would be doing statues. God just kept sending them. And we even got to work on the staircase at the Loretto Chapel in New Mexico.
Oh, wow. Really?
The underside of it, yes, was plastered and painted to make it look like wood. And there were chunks out of it. And we went on vacation, and the curator was, we told him we restored statues, and John says, "Oh, we could fix that." And I'm kicking him. No.
I like your husband. I like your husband a lot.
No. But we did. We went down there in 95 and we worked on that. I mean, God just kept, it's such an honor. I mean, it's not us. It's just, he gave us those gifts. It just happened. That's all I can say.
I love how I think about the story of St. Francis, right? Where our Lord says, "Build my church." And it's like, what do you mean? Like, there are guys who are building Gothic cathedrals out. What do you mean I build? What exactly do you mean, right? But this is something about the traditional movement as it is right now that I'm absolutely in love with. This organic cottage industry. And I keep using that word organic because for people on the outside looking in, it really isn't a thing of vainglory, which is beautiful because there's just so much immense talent I meet with people. It really is for the love of God and his church. And it's amazing what a little bit of that, for my purposes, most of my work in Hollywood, of course, was secular. And so I remember for the longest amount of time, I said, I love my faith and I love my film, but I don't know if I ever want to meld them together, because every time I see a Christian movie or something, my eyes pop out of my skull. And every time I see a secular movie with like some Christianity or some Catholicism sprinkled in, I always roll my eyes and go, okay, that's not right either. But when I went to my first Latin Mass out there, I remember saying, I know what I want to do with my life. And I think that God has led me back, not just home to Colorado, but working at a Catholic apostolate as I do, which happens to also have high bar filmmaking, because I kind of surrender. I was like, okay, I understand what I feel like you're calling me to do. So when you kind of respond to that call, it's amazing the sort of stuff you create all of a sudden.
Oh my gosh, he's got you too, doesn't he?
You should have seen. I mean, if you'd have found me 4 years ago, I'd have said, "Listen, I love my faith. I really do. I'm a Catholic forever, but I do not want to make a God's not dead. Do not ask this of me, Lord." Good. So
I get that.
And now I have schemes. There's a project. I love it, man. So we'll obviously stay in contact, not just because we're parishioners together, but because I have a scheme. This is one of my I call it my projects after dark, because I think that I don't know if I'd be able to, even though it'd be popular, I don't think it'd be able to quite do it under the aegis of the Augustine Institute. Spare my poor employer. But I'd love to call it renovation, which is just the history of, here's church architecture, here's how they gutted it, and here are the people in the trenches who are building it back, Yes. So So
Yes.
when I kick that off the ground, we will be best friends indeed.
Wonderful. And I know people that are in the movement too. And also I have some art school friends from the 80s, and I've got them doing it now.
Wow.
It's just great. And they're hooked.
Yeah.
They're hooked.
Well, and there's something about it. So one thing, when I was in Hollywood, one thing I observed is that anytime a movie, positive or negative depiction of the faith, but because film is a very visual medium, when anyone in Hollywood needs a Catholic church, when they need a priest, a mass, whatever, a nun, whatever it is, they go for like the gusto. You could tell the most secular atheist or Jew or anybody in Hollywood, hey, this is like the big, we're doing a romantic comedy. This is the big wedding at the very end. They're getting married in a Catholic church. It's beautiful because we want our protagonists to be in love, right? What are you going to give me? And they will get the incense. They will get the vestments. They will get the choir. They will get the most. I know the top 4 churches in LA that they're like, we have to film here or here or here or here. So it's amazing. It's amazing how we are creatures of ritual, but we're also creatures of, we have to have that visual kind of component. And
Oh yes.
Oh yes. And it's not just smells and bells, but they matter. They very much matter.
Well, I was just going to come in on restoring statues for people. It's not the money.
No.
What it is they're giving me like their great grandparents' statue that's really dilapidated. And when I touch it up and make it look so much better and give it back to, that's my payment, the joy. It's precious.
That's right.
You can't, and so the visual of seeing beauty like that. Father Jackson talked about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
It's in all our priests. It's so important, especially for children, to see these gorgeous things.
Well, it's the gospel of the poor, right? How much of the Catholic faith is this is so amazing. And as a Protestant coming in, I'm sure that you have a little bit of this, but how much of the gospel is transmitted just because we visually see what it is? How is it that we can see, like Peter depicted in all these different artistic fashions all across the eras? It's like, okay, this guy is holding the keys to the kingdom. He looks like he has some authority. That's St. Peter. That's St. Michael. Whether he's wearing Roman armor or Venetian armor or contemporary armor, whatever it is, that's St. Michael. That's St. Bartholomew. Like you know these things. That's the Annunciation. I've seen it in iconography and contemporary art and sacred. These are, I think, we've completely neglected the importance of beauty as one of the transcendentals. And it's such a shame, because no wonder people lose, and also people don't explore their faith more, because if something's just plain and of the world, then why go deeper with it,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it doesn't speak to your heart the way the beauty does, and truth, beauty, and goodness.
Yeah. So beautiful. So
I know
beautiful.
we could just go on and on about how important it is.
I know. I want to know, as you wind down, I want to know, just so many. So even with the commercial training as an artist, with the years of experience on various projects behind, what about painting a sanctuary? What's a thing that you maybe learned or something that was part of the process that was like, oh, this is actually like, this is the proper way in order to do this that maybe you weren't thinking of prior to doing it?
Oh goodness, just in so many projects, people ask me to do stuff I have no idea how to do. And since I lost John, I frequently asked his soul, can you send some advice down here? How do I do this or whatever? But I learned from Kevin and Laura just how important it is to be precise and bold and hardworking and just focused on what we were trying to do. We worked really long hours, really hard, trying to get these things to the point. And that kind of artwork takes many, many hours. It's very involved in everything, and it's tedious and so on. But the reward is, at the end of the day, you stand back and you look at like a wall that you did, and you're just like, wow. And knowing that people will see that for a really long time. I'm humbled to the core every time I walk in there and see it. I am. It's extraordinary. It is, and it'll inspire so many people. And it's a joy that our priests can offer mass there. I'm sure they love it, and it just everybody. But yeah, I learned, just hard work, perseverance, and I made mistakes. I know that's hard to imagine.
Considering how that sanctuary looks, I don't even know where to begin.
and I got to say that Kevin and Laura were always like so kind to me, and we could fix it, we could paint over it, that's okay, and really, really super helpful. They never made me feel like I was, awkward or not able to do it, and I was just thrilled that I was able to help speed it up because they were just exhausted at that point. That kind of project is amazing, but the design of it is and the symbology of it'll all be explained. It'll be written down, and I've got a couple of favorites. The Lamb of God in the main arch up there at the top. I just love that. And it just goes so. And they were working behind the main altar. They had a ladder, would not let me go up there, and they had a bucket. They would, bring up their supplies, and every time they were up there, I was just praying constantly, that they would be safe, and they were just fearless. And, and that is it stands for itself.
There's a phenomenon since I've been going a lot in mass I've noticed with myself, and the Novus Ordo, because there's such I think it's the wrong interpretation of what active participation means. Has to stimulate you, otherwise they're going to be bored. In Latin Mass, especially in the low Mass, I find myself looking places in the sanctuary, and it's not a distracted way that you might have done, at a previous Mass. It's because there is something of beauty and something of the transcendental truth, something of God that draws my eye. So I can't tell you how many Sundays, especially after communion, that I crane my neck up to look at the stars that are on top, right? Just this image of heaven looking down. I love that. I love the Lamb of God over honestly, like I remember it was towards the tail end of you guys finishing. On the left, I'm pretty sure it was the left side, maybe the right side, but there's these beautiful gold leaf stars and all that kind of stuff, right? And there's a red stripe. And I remember because the stars hadn't gone over the stripe, but it looked like it was cut off right there. And I remember sitting there going, I don't know. This is how I was so misread. I was going, I don't know how these people are going to do this. Like, I don't know what that process looks like, but I know that it's going to be so perfect when it's finished, because already I'm getting excited. Just feeling, the holiness. So.
Well, and I have to compliment Kevin and Laura too, because when they did the construction so that they could work, believe it or not, the sides weren't even. Can you imagine that construction? How did that happen, right? So they had to, like, with mathematics, refigure, how to make the sides look pretty much exact without it being exact, and they did it. It was just incredible.
Wow. One thing about Carmel that I love is the nature of the Gothic architecture. What's good about Gothic architecture is, again, you naturally crane your eyes upward to heaven. You crane up to the altar. You crane up. We have the altar, the crucifix, and here's Our Lady with our Lord here at the top. You just have to. All these leading lines, my filmmaker brain goes crazy just seeing all these leading lines pointing to the reality of Christ right there. But it's amazing how in every little corner of that beautiful little church is just, again, it's just beauty, and it's so peaceful. And it's funny as a cradle, because I always say this with traditionals, especially traditionals who are coming in from a cradle background, that It's very easy to feel like your heritage was robbed, but it's far better to simply rejoice in the restoration and to be part of the restoration. That's why we're glad trads here, right? We're not mad trads because
exactly, not grim.
Yeah, and you know our slogan on this show is Risus et Bellum, right? It's laughter and war. And in order for you to survive this crazy world, you just have to do that. You have to love Mass in a tent. You have to love Mass in a strip mall. You have to love Mass in a cathedral, wherever you, or in a hotel room, in a school chapel, if you can get it. You know, like, and it's amazing because in all those cases, I've never like, it's not a comparison. It's always like, this is the Mass of the ages. There's no other way to describe it.
It is, absolutely. And I hope you'll let me say that having been in the, I don't want to say the fight, the movement to keep this beautiful Mass growing. And I'm getting older, and I love that I got to be on here tonight because I know that a lot of younger people will see this, I hope. And to all of you, I say, I'm in this with you right to the end. And it's going to be a different kind of, I don't want to say war, movement for you to keep this alive and growing. But I always think of the Lord of the Rings movie when Aragorn gets off the ship with just a few and the enemy is laughing at him and giggling. And then all those souls get off the ship and they go crazy. And I told a bunch of young people in the parish hall, I said, that's you guys. And then your friend Kevin said to me, and if you get too old, we'll just put you on our back and we'll carry you with us.
That's right. No problem.
So I'm so excited for the future. And, it could be tricky, but it's going to be glorious.
Yeah, absolutely.
You young people, your love, your reverence, your fervor is just on fire, and I love it.
Well, and this is especially about the Latin Mass that I love so much. We stand on the shoulders of giants. And it's not just a nice little phrase that you've heard your entire life. You can actually have a legitimate tie back to your ancestors, to the saints. One of my favorite patrons is Saint Thomas More, and I think about in his lifetime, he watched Catholicism get ripped away overnight, almost essentially. And even though it's Chesterton's quote, like, you can build a statue out of snow and marble, and they might look the same for a while, but just let the sun come up and do its business. You give enough time, and I know I'm very Chesterton, right? Yeah.
That's perfect. And my favorite saint is Saint Edmund Campion, and who hid in priest holes and gave his life for that. And you bet. I love the snow thing. That's great.
That's so beautiful.
We're built on sand. This is built on a rock.
Yes.
It's.
And that's why it's just coming back through. And that's the most exciting thing. It's amazing how all of us have our faith journeys. God is pulling us, is calling us to the fullness of truth, I find. And he's calling us into deeper joy and to peace and to mystery. And it's amazing how, again, it is. I love the analogy of Aragorn hopping off the ship because my wife and I just watched Return of the King not 4 days ago. So, but that's it. And those souls, those are the representation of those who have gone before us and those who have worked extremely diligently and difficult. And sometimes they've lost everything for it. I mean, we've talked to a lot of people who lost a lot of. The changes happened. They wanted to preserve something. They came back and said, we really don't want red carpet in the sanctuary, Father, please no. And they stayed with, even though it seemed like they were all deserted, that it was darkest before the dawn. Yes,
it was. And it was worth it so much. It's the one great pearl.
Yeah. The pearl of great price indeed.
It is.
Oh, Jodi, I am so grateful for you to have come on and to have graced me with your presence. Thank you so much. You're an absolute treasure, not just for the parish, but certainly to the Lord. Just your work, your example of faith is completely. I am completely humbled that you would come on and talk to little old me. So,
oh goodness, I'm the humble one here. Thank you. It's been a real honor, and I'm just thrilled with your work, and I'm going to support it to the hilt.
You're so wonderful. We would love to hear your comments on maybe you are also a restorationist in the highest degree, dear listeners. Maybe you do statues or interior sanctuary work or anything to help support your parish a little bit. We'd love to hear that in the comment section. We always love to hear your stories. Please, please, please keep Jodi in your prayers. Keep her husband in your prayers, John. Although, you know, this is the one non-trad thing of me, but sometimes you're just like, okay, listen, if there's going to be some guy in heaven, it's probably going to be this guy. You know what I mean?
yeah, except he told me you better be praying for my soul forever.
I know. Listen, if I can get in by a fingernail, I'm going to be into purgatory. I'm going to be absurdly happy. Please like and share this video. Share this with family and friends far and wide. If you would like to support us, also consider our Patreon, where we have a lot of really fun little perks, including early episodes, the ability to suggest topics, and even the ability to come on the show and share your own story of tradition. And of course, please continue to keep us in your prayers as we continue to pray for you. So until next time, God bless you and may He keep you. We'll see you in the next one. Adios.